Well, welcome to session 6 of the Iowa Ideas Conference in the Human and Social Services track. I'm Todd Dorman. I'm the Insight Editor at the Gazette and a columnist, and I'll be moderating the panel. And today's session is we'll be discussing immigrant and refugee long-term success in Iowa, and also what needs the state has to better assist refugees as they come here and become residents of the state. So this session is sponsored by Inclusive ICR, and I think we have a short video from that organization.
Hi friends, Angelica Bennett, co-chair of Inclusive ICR. We are a coalition of over 220 employers in Eastern Iowa, all working together to grow the diversity and inclusion of our workforce, to create a space where employees feel a sense of belonging, included, and valued. Inclusive ICR is a proud sponsor of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion track of the Iowa Ideas Conference. As you participate today, be sure to connect with other Inclusive ICR champions, as we'd love to share information with you about our upcoming coalition meetings, projects, and how our work is impacting positive social change in our region. Be sure to check out our website at inclusivicr.org for upcoming events and our e-newsletter. Thank you and have a great conference.
Okay, well, thank you. Of course, this discussion is going to be among our panelists, but also anyone watching who has a question is welcome to submit it. And I'll fit that in as we move along. The sessions are closed captioned, and they're all being recorded. So I'm going to introduce the panelists right now, and we have Mugisha Gloire, who is with United We March Forward in Cedar Rapids. He's the executive director and founder of the organization. Minouche Bandubuila works with YPN, which used to be called Young Parents Network, and also works with the Cedar Rapids Community School District. Alison Hoeman works in refugee support in Des Moines. Stephanie Moris is with the Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa, and Robin Clark Bennett is the director of the University of Iowa Labor Center. So welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. When we met earlier this week to sort of talk about what we hope to talk about, Stephanie, you gave a really good overview of sort of the refugee situation globally, nationally, and in Iowa. Maybe you could paint that picture for our audience.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure that most people are aware of some of the things that are happening currently that have been making a lot of news this year with both Ukraine and Afghanistan. But in the world, we have over 100 million people displaced. Those numbers, all of the applications, all of the processing that happens, that's done by one international organization. That's the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. So they estimate over 100 million people displaced right now. Of that 100 million, only 24 million people have been designated refugees. And so those individuals, most people, if you can imagine fleeing your home in the middle of the night or fleeing conflict, most people do want to go home. It's quite a, there's a lot that goes to it in terms of fleeing, but then to sign up to go to a place you've never been, into a language that you don't speak, in a culture and society you don't know. It is the wish of most people to return home. But so of that 100 million people, 24 million people are considered, or what are classified as, refugees. And so those individuals are not going to go home. Either there's not a home to go back to, it's not safe. Excuse me. Conflict is ongoing. And so those individuals then are waiting to be resettled into a new country. I always preface conversations about refugee resettlement just by mentioning, that migration's been happening since the beginning of time. It's part of human history. But when we talk about the word refugee today, we're talking about those that have this official like UNHCR designation. So yeah, we've got 24 million people waiting to be placed into new homes. The average wait time in a refugee camp was 17 years. That was before COVID. That was before a lot of changes to our own resettlement immigration policies and previous administrations. So it's a long wait. Camps can oftentimes be subjected to additional violence, additional weather events. There's a lot that happens in refugee camps. Not everybody has the right to work or the right to education. But yeah, so that's currently what it's a broader, very general picture of what it might be going on internationally. And then here in the United States, we've obviously this past year have had a lot of Afghan arrivals after the fall of the Afghan government. We have Ukrainian sponsors that are coming. And then we also have the regular refugee reception and placement, or RMP program, happening as well. And then of course, a lot of migrants and asylum applications coming from south of the United States and from other countries as well.
And both the pandemic and reductions in the number of refugees being accepted by the Trump administration complicated things for resettlement, didn't they, in the last few years? Stephanie, I'm sorry, did you? I think she got muted. But so Mugisha, maybe you could tell us briefly a little bit about your organization in Cedar Rapids, and also when you have contact with refugee families who are coming to Cedar Rapids. I mean, what are their initial needs, and how is the community working to fulfill those?
Thank you. Can you hear me though?
Yes.
Okay. So I think for me, myself as an individual, and also as United March Forward, we're in a very unique position. So I was born in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and 22 years ago, as many immigrants and refugees, I did not speak the language. Each year we were moving, so renting different house each year, struggling to find the basic needs. Many times we were relying on friends and family members to sort of help us understand where are the resources, get into doctor's appointment, going to church, and so many other things. It was always relying on that very interconnected network that many immigrants and refugees really rely on, because when you can't speak the language, how do you communicate your needs? How do you advocate for yourself? And so many other things. So that was sort of my upbringing, and I would say I was very rich in resources. We have abundance of resources available here to residents, and as a retired nurse and just looking more into the future and looking at the gifts and skills that I could offer, it just made sense to be part of the solution here in Cedar Rapids, as far as how do we support an ever-growing community with immigrants and refugees. And so many families, there's families that we support that come through various ways, whether it's a spouse visa, whether it's a visiting visa, whether they're coming from a different state to Cedar Rapids, whether they've been here for more than 10 years or more than 20 years and still are seeking to learn English, or are seeking to learn what are the resources. Draco just said, my house is destroyed. I don't know where to go. How can you help me? So those are the ways that United March Forward works with the community. And many times we're seeking to really, how can we help people become self-sufficient, right? Because for me, it's like I'm an example of that. But how can we help more people become self-sufficient where they can take care of their family, they can be entrepreneurs, they can get their doctor's degrees and so many other things. So, so for me as an immigrant myself, that's always in the back of my mind. What is a thriving community? What is a successful, self-sufficient, contributing member of the community here in Cedar Rapids? And with that in mind, we, I'll say, always focus on purposefully building those relationships, making those connections to resources that can encourage, educate, and empower folks that are in our community to have a sense of belonging. And I guess I'm always going back to my science. Is more of like Maslow's hierarchy. When someone has a sense of belonging, they're more likely to do a lot of things. And of course, the basic needs are always there: food, shelter, housing, employment. But yeah.
And, in addition to those basic needs, you need to navigate the fact that refugees are coming from different walks of life. They're coming from different backgrounds. They speak different languages, have different cultures. I mean, is that sort of is that difficult, or how does your organization navigate that?
So one of our program, our case management, we sit down with the individual, and we speak with them, really just building that relationship. And at the end of sort of the assessment or the conversation, we ask them, "What are your three needs? What are your three needs?" And sometimes, and that's gonna be different. I'm always going back to a young woman that came from Washington State here to Cedar Rapids, and this was the formation of our case management. But here she is, pregnant and with a 4-year-old, sleeping in her car. So when we started working with her, we got to know her story, and we got to know her needs and her wants. So in 30 days, she had housing, she had medical assistance, food assistance, childcare assistance. We had connected her to Kirkwood into one of the CNA program. So that was about 3.5 years ago. So now she is working her way to become a nurse. So 3 years later, someone that was homeless with 2 kids is now pursuing her nursing career. And that is just more of really looking at folks as individuals and assessing how do we help them become self-sufficient, because each individual is very unique on what exactly their need is. So I'll say that's one of the examples on how we work with families.
Mm-hmm. And you said this week that it takes a community. So these success stories, are they based on the fact that there's a network of groups that can provide help in different areas?
Definitely. And it's the reason why united we march forward, because it takes more. It takes everyone really coming together, the resources, everything. It takes a really a strong network of different professionals and businesses, and to really help families just move through this crisis continuum, ladder, if you might as well just put it that way. But and many times, at the end of the day, immigrants and refugees who are here, they want to be successful. They want to help their community. They want to contribute. So the stronger the networks and the collaboration with different organizations in the community, with different individuals, the stronger to help someone just move up that ladder and become self-sufficient.
Minouche, you work with parents and students. What are the education needs? I think when we talked this week, you talked about navigating the healthcare system can be difficult for refugees. Maybe you could talk about both education and healthcare.
Yeah, thank you so much. And like myself, I always like to start to giving a little bit my own story. I came here as a immigrant on diversity visa. I was pregnant. It was my first child, and my uncle Nado Bolumbu, who was here, and he accepted me. Even I remember when I was back in Congo, when I was telling my friend like, "Oh, I want the diversity visa. I'm going to Iowa," and a lot of them they were like, "Oh, do you think Iowa?" And yeah, it's really challenging coming here and with no English. And for me being pregnant, it was hard to understand the health care because I wasn't qualified for anything. And it was really tough for me. I was like, okay, I have my papers, I have Social Security, but how come I don't have access to the healthcare? But because of my immigrant status, I wasn't qualified for all those benefits. It was just hard to go through of everything. Bills was coming every day, and then I was like, I'm not working. And that really helped me through all my experience. Was like how myself with that experience, I can help others also to overcome, like to understand, like you are coming, you are new. We do have a lot of resources here. We have free clinic. You can go. We have Eastern Iowa. You can go instead of coming and go directly to the hospital, because sometimes it's hard even to understand the status. Like for this kind of the status, you are not qualified for these services. And I have the opportunity to work with young parents, and I was the African program specialist through YPN. I facilitated the African program group, the parent cafe, and also I was doing home visitation to the families. On the parenting classes, it's every Thursday, and YPN has a unique model of earning points, because the moms, they're coming to the program, they're earning points, and we have a wicker shop to help them to utilize those points, the wicker shop, to get diapers, baby items, clothes, anything. And for them coming to the program, we are talking about educational, we are talking about child development, all those needs for the families, and just a place for them coming and feeling connected, creating a relationship between them, and then to help each other as well. Because on my home visitation, a lot of moms, they were coming like to wicker shop asking for baby formula, and I was really, they have the weak card, but they were always coming to asking for baby formula, and I was like asking myself why they have the weak card, but it's just for them. It was hard. We have resources here, but to access those resources, it's also another challenging. And for me, I'm start thinking what I need to do to help them to access those services. And one of the things I did for a week, I was able to go myself to the store and record myself in French and in Swahili to show them what's the difference between kilogram and ounces, which the food you need to get that will that's acceptable to week. And with all those videos that I made, that helped me to teach them, like when I was doing my home visitation, when we were the parenting classes, to teach them how to utilize the week card, and that makes really a big change of their life. That's kind of the thing I always say. Cedar Rapids is a really best place to be. We have a lot of resources here, but the access of those resources is also challenging.
Yeah, yeah. Alison, other needs include, of course, somewhere to live, housing, employment. What are the, in Des Moines, what are the obstacles to achieving both of those goals?
So Des Moines has no affordable housing. I mean, that's just how it is right now. We have the resources that we have are so limited. There was a study done recently that said that for every 100 families that need an affordable housing unit, there's only 30 available in the Des Moines area. And it's just, that's what's been really hard. So what ended up happening is that when we had, close to 1,000 Afghans show up in Des Moines, they ended up staying in long stay hotels for months and months and months. And while they were in the hotels, nobody was working. The kids weren't going to school. A lot of the kids missed an entire year of school because they were sitting in a hotel doing absolutely nothing. They didn't have transportation to go utilize like Minouche was saying, to utilize and be able to access the resources that were available to them. And so that has been a huge struggle. I know that when refugees come, there's a whole process for employment. And part of it is, doing some cultural acclimatization. Some of it is, they have to do their refugee physical and all kinds of things. Some of these things seem to have been put by the wayside because there were so many Afghans arriving and it just wasn't happening. I know that we were told by Broadlawns that they just weren't showing up for their refugee physicals because they didn't have transportation to go to their refugee physical. And so this doctor's appointment that was so hard to get because there's only a couple doctors in Des Moines that even do it, then they had to try to reschedule it because they weren't getting the transportation to be able to get there. So I think Minouche really hit it, that there's the resources are there, it's being able to access them. And we've noticed that transportation is just a lot of times the biggest barrier to being able to access the resources that people need. And DART just doesn't cut it in Des Moines, doesn't go enough places.
Yeah, and even if is it true, even if they find some housing, because landlords can lawfully discriminate based on lawful source of income, which basically, they just turn away people that are on some sort of public assistance, that even if the housing is available, they can't rent it. Is that correct?
Or even if they can get it at first because their resettlement agency helped them to get it, right? They can get it at first. A lot of them, we've found that refugees, they move all the time. They're constantly on the hunt for cheaper, better housing, and which disrupts school, which disrupts, for me as a teacher, that's the biggest thing that it disrupts, right? Is that these kids are already trying to learn a new language, a new culture, and then they're going to a different school every year, that they're having to move because, the housing is too expensive. They can't afford it anymore. They found something else. That has been a really big issue. And yeah, just not being able to apply for the housing because they don't have be able to show, that they're making enough money or whatever that is. That has been a huge issue as well. For example, when the Afghans first arrived, they were able to, their agencies were able to help them get housing eventually after, many months in hotels. But a lot of them have said, like, I can't continue to afford this. I have to try to find something else.
Right. So Robin, if the refugees find work, they may not necessarily know what their rights are as workers, and that sets them up to be exploited. Is that happening?
Yeah, as I listen to this discussion and think about that issue, I just want to underscore the ways in which I am just struck by how completely immigrants and refugees strengthen and revitalize our communities. And I say that because, these issues that people are talking about, housing, transportation, workers' rights, These are issues that have been large systems that have been broken in some very serious ways for a long time, and for decades, for our communities in general. And immigrant and refugee communities have really served as have really been catalysts in a lot of our communities in calling our attention to the need to address those issues, and really leading exciting initiatives to address those issues. And so, it takes extraordinary courage and determination to rebuild, to start from scratch. And that work is made harder by these underlying systems. And so, one thing I just want to say is that, our minimum wage, it's not enough to survive in any community, right? And many of our workers' rights are riddled with loopholes and poor enforcement. And so that is compounded by vulnerabilities in terms of language, in terms of not knowing rights. So, we're really proud to play a role in providing research and education for immigrant and refugee communities and for workers across the state, for workers' organizations, churches, and immigrant advocate groups, to really familiarize people with the rights that do exist. And I'm really heartened by initiatives across the state, including in Eastern Iowa, like the Center for Worker Justice, where immigrant and refugee leaders have really taken a leading role in creating networks that are providing new resources that didn't exist, where workers can come to learn about their rights and have community help in enforcing those rights. And so, like, the Center for Worker Justice brings together unions, churches, led by immigrant and refugee community members to really be a hub for asking the question Minouche asked: why are these things happening, right, in communities with so much plenty? And what can we do to both help people immediately, but also question, does it really have to be like that, right? And and have helped to spur efforts to increase the minimum wage, to strengthen wage theft protections, to strengthen tenants' rights and residents' rights. And so, I think these communities both lie at the crux of, really are most severely affected by these gaps, and are, I think, one of the brightest lights of hope in terms of addressing those issues.
Okay. So Stephanie, Alison was talking about the situation in Des Moines with networks and community support and transportation. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think that, in Des Moines, I would always, when in talking about both Afghanistan, which was most definitely outside of normal refugee resettlement, what's going on with Ukraine and the sponsorships, and also just normal refugee resettlement. I definitely want to mention just like how much how proud I am of the 4 resettlement agencies in Iowa. So that's Catholic Charities, USCRI, and the Catherine McCauley Center in Cedar Rapids, LSI, Lutheran Services in Iowa, and the International Rescue Committee. I mean, their staff just worked easily 70 plus hours a week, moved mountains with second, third, fourth hand shovels, and gave up like all facets of their own kind of personal lives outside of work for many months over the past year. In Des Moines, I think that there are a lot of resettlement agency offices around the country. There's well over 200 of them, and we hear pretty regularly from them and from our local community leaders here that the way that Iowa's the way that Central Iowa and across the state, that our community partners come together, work together, leverage existing resources together, that's not something that happens in every place across the country. So I'm incredibly proud of our network too. And then, I think that, looking at refugee resettlement, talking about transportation, all of our new Iowans, when they get here, learning public transportation, learning how to get to and from, it's part of that. when refugee resettlement, or the modern program that we refer to as it, started in the mid 70s, it was a 2-year sponsorship model. There was funding and support services for new arrivals for 2 years. A lot of countries in Europe and across the world still utilize that 2-year kind of reacculturation process. And we wish that was that way. I mean, if there was anybody, at the front of the line advocating for more funding, for more resources, it's these refugee resettlement staff, many of whom are former refugees themselves. So yeah, it's now down to a 90-day, what's called a self-sufficiency model. Which is really, really hard. If you can imagine trying to figure out how to live in a new country, in a new language, in an entirely new culture in 90 days. Sometimes it can be extended to 180 days, but still, it's just not enough time. So, we help manage and organize the Refugee Day on the Hill every February, and that's definitely something that we really try to bring more attention to. And when there's funding or policies that can help support that, that's definitely something that we would love to see more of. And also, I think that, most importantly, when we're talking about how refugee resettlement works, how people are best supported in the long run, I do want to mention, how important it is for our state, for our communities to support our ethnic community-based nonprofit organizations. During COVID, these community-based organizations, many of whom are run by volunteer staff that don't receive payment, they really helped connect emergent information to well over 100,000 people in Central and throughout, across the entire state, just to keep safe and keep healthy through a global pandemic, while many of those workers were considered essential workers. So, making sure that funding and supports go to these organizations that are founded by and that are run by, the community members themselves, and really making sure that we're giving them what they need to, feel empowered, to be invited to spaces and planning, so that, they have what they need to be able to advocate on behalf of themselves, that it's really strengths-based and it's not re-victimizing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And all, English language learning is important, Stephanie, of course, and we don't have exactly abundant funding for those programs.
Yeah, that's true. We have well over 1,000 new Iowans in our state since this time last year, and we're still operating under the same budget. ELL funding, or English language learner funding, they have 2 different streams. There's K through 12, and then there's adult or community-based. So both of those programs, have a lot of new enrollees, and we're still operating on the previous year's budget as well.
The other thing that has happened with ELL is that a lot of the housing that happened to be available for Afghans, they ended up at schools that don't have a whole bunch of ELL teachers. And so the kids, because they're operating from last year's budget and for how, what their numbers were last year, the kids ended up in schools where they maybe have one ELL teacher, and all of a sudden they've got, 12, 15, 20 new kids that don't speak a word of English in their schools. And that's happened in Des Moines, it's happened in Johnston. And so just that, trying to get everybody caught up, like, oh man, we've got a lot of new kids here that need a lot of support. That's been really tough on the schools as well.
Mugisha, in Cedar Rapids, what's the transportation situation for refugees and immigrants? I know that a lot of folks, work at plants in Tama and Waterloo and places like that because they have programs that help them learn English, especially English for the workplace. Is getting to work and getting around a problem in our area?
Yes, I'd say so. And I was, when I was speaking about sense of belonging, because so many times in order to feel a sense of belonging, you now need the basic needs that need to be met. And I think that's where that's what all of us are at trying to look at how do we figure out, how do we advocate for those resources? How do we really look at the big picture? And so as far as transportation, I think it's still here in Cedar Rapids, it's still something that needs to be addressed and really looked at. Because, you have immigrants and refugees, individuals and families who are still relying on other people to get them to employment. You hear about car accident, 15 passenger van, so many people died. All of them were carpooling to work. So I think the transportation system still needs to be looked at very closely. And then just got to figure out, what exactly does that look like? There are great other organizations, I can't discredit, there are great other organizations that are stepping forward. So like NTS here in Cedar Rapids, I believe they're doing some good things, some great things to support some of the refugees and immigrants, and other organizations that are stepping up as far as providing those solutions to transportation. But I think we still have a long way to go because many of the families, whether it's Ukrainian, Afghanian, or other countries of folks that are coming here, many times they are the frontline workers. And what that means is many times that means that they're working far away from home. So they're going to manufacturing companies that might be 30 minutes or to an hour away from home. That's what's happening here in Cedar Rapids. You have folks that are driving, going all the way to Tama, for employment. They're going all the way to Waterloo for employment. And then, just locally, how do we find solution to make sure that that our local transportation are more efficient and can get folks to where they need to be in a timely manner. So there's definitely a lot more things that need to be done, whether it's education, but I think also really providing more resources for transportation infrastructure and really getting behind and supporting organizations that are looking at ways to address transportation. So yeah.
Yeah, Cedar Rapids has bus service, but it can be, you have to really plan ahead because it can be a long trip to where you're going if you have to transfer and go down to the downtown facility and switch buses, and it can take a long time to get even a short distance. So yeah, that's definitely an impediment. And we designed our cities to encourage people to live on the outskirts and drive cars on highways and we let that infrastructure in the core sort of fall apart, and that's where a lot of lower income folks and immigrants and those live. And I think we need to flip that paradigm in order to get something done on that. Minouche, I'm going to ask you also about the situation you're seeing in Cedar Rapids with employment and transportation and housing, and what you think the challenges are.
Yeah, when we were talking about the busing, and there's one thing we need to think, like the population that are coming from some of the places, let's say in Africa, there's no snow, there's no cold. And then coming here, experiencing waiting outside for an hour in the cold, it's not easy. And for me, like on my parenting classes, I always like to kind of build their spirits first. I understand, like what I always say, like I know it's hard when you're coming here for the first time, but it's not impossible to achieve your goals. And those are the things I like first to give them that hope. And also to create a community, because as an individual, we can create a really strong community. Like on my parenting classes, I always give more points for those who they'll go pick up someone and bring them to parenting classes, because at YPN we utilize NTS for the basics to go pick up families. But on my group, usually I add more points for the families who will go pick up others to just to make them to make that connection and then to come to the group. Right now with the program I'm doing at Hoover, I don't even utilize NTS anymore. It's just the family themselves that becomes self-sufficient in that transportation issue. Just the way for me, just to think about the solution, how we can overcome or create another ways for families to stay connected.
And oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, we talked about this the other day, that during the pandemic, when your parent meetings had to go to Zoom, some of the families ran into some technical issues, and maybe you could talk about how you solved that.
Yeah, we all know, like during pandemic, it was really hard, and with COVID as well, our group we were not able to do it physically. We transferred to virtual, and for me, I have a big challenge with my group because they didn't know about Zoom, and my director of the program was just like, Minouche, how are we gonna do? I said, I will find a way. I started talking with each moms and to encourage them first to talk to them about the importance of the phone. You have your phone, it's a smartphone, you can utilize it in different ways. And then I start teaching them how to utilize, how to download Zoom and to be able to use it. And then I was going to their house, each person, to teach them to do the training, to kind of play around Zoom, and also to mute yourself, to turn off your cameras, to know all the tools we have at Zoom. And it was a lot of time for me because their time was so much different. Some of them, they were working at Tama, coming home late. I was working until like 10 p.m. because I wanted to be able to reach everybody. And that worked on my parenting classes. I had 45 moms that were connected in Zoom. And until now, even though we are back in person, I still have Zoom available for those who they cannot come in person. And until now, we still utilize the Zoom.
Yeah, that's an important tool going forward, even after the pandemic, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is that as far as making improvements in this process, and we haven't even talked about the immigration system and its problems. Rob and I may come to you for that at some point, or anyone that wants to talk about it. But it seems like there's this community network aspect to this, where you need a strong community network of organizations and groups to provide the services that are needed and to rise to the challenges that come up. But then you've got this other sort of out of reach part, that's the legislature and Congress, and ELL funding and the minimum wage and lawful source of income and more money for public transportation. All of that stuff is sort of running on dual tracks to make this system work better. I mean, do you feel like legislators and members of Congress and people working in state and federal governments understand these problems, or how? And if they don't, how do you get them to understand? Alison, you're shaking your head. So,
I mean, just the fact that they haven't passed the Afghan Adjustment Act yet, like that we're still trying to convince legislators to do that. We've got a group of people going in 4 minutes to Grassley's office to see if they can talk to any of his staff and talk to them about, hey, we need to do this. I mean, just that alone is ridiculous.
I would add,
ahead.
I would say, we've been, we offer a summit every fall where service providers can learn how to work with refugee communities better. We also help put on World Refugee Day here locally every June. And, since being part of this network, 10 years ago, I'd say that, we consistently have staff members from all of our elected officials show up. They're there for our quarterly meetings. I mean, I do feel that they're aware of what's going on. We regularly meet with elected officials about, I'm emailing this morning about something separate to supporting some resettlement funding. I do think that they're receptive to it. I do think historically, again, especially in the 70s and 80s, that, we've always had bipartisan support in the state for resettlement, for a myriad of reasons. But, with the Afghan Adjustment Act, for example, we've met with Grassley, multiple times over the past year, and we've heard, his office's, objections to the bill as it stands. Obviously it would make everyone's lives a lot easier if they passed it, and it just makes so much sense. But, I do think, every single time that we've ever had, issues come up with individuals or with communities, when we've presented and had conversations about those things with our elected officials, whether it be, our US senators, our state senators, today, it was 10 years ago, our, Iowa legislators, we're able to meet with them and we're able to be heard. And I do think that things happen, pretty quickly.
Yeah, speaking of elected officials, we have a question from Cedar Rapids, I believe. Cedar Rapids City Councilwoman Ashley Vernorny. And she says, I'm familiar with these speakers and they are absolutely experts in this field. As such, what are some things your community can do to actually make you feel safe, supported, and help to be welcomed into the community? So here's your chance to at least lobby a city council person. I don't know, Mugisha or Minouche,
Can you
you're in
repeat
Cedar.
that one? Can
Oh,
you repeat
okay.
that again?
Yes, I am familiar with these speakers and they are absolutely experts in this field. As such, what are some things your community can do that actually make you feel safe, supported, and help you be welcomed into the community?
So I'll try to touch on both. How do we work with officials that are maybe part of the solution? I truly believe in this sense of approaching things with a relationship aspect to it. Like our board members also are buddy. So we have this way of giving back where our board member connect with our English language learners. So they meet with them with a minimum of 30 minutes a month. So this builds that relationship where they can also sort of get an understanding, like, this is how life can be. This is sort of like the barriers that someone can go through, because a lot of time when you're not in it, it's easy to just say, oh, that system is broken, we need to just A, B, C, D, and because we just want to critically think and strategically plan and find a solution. But many times when you're not connected with the community itself, you'll figure out that maybe that's not what they wanted. It's really something else. So I think, with any elected official, any person in power, and everyone has that power, having a relationship with someone that's employed at a big company can go a long way, because if that company is advocating to a legislator to do something, but internally the employees are having a conversation that we need to help immigrants, we need to help other folks in this area, then the whole company is really starting to address some of the things that need to be addressed. Then you find that elected official, or those who are speaking with elected officials, can really change their decision. So I guess, if rumbling on and on, what I would say is, Ashley, I know her also, and I watch her very closely, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful for her contribution, her dedication to the city. I'd say she always surprises me on just her achievements, and really a willingness to serve the community. In ways, I think is just listening to ethnic organizations, organizations that are led by, ethnic minorities, listening to the community members themselves, the leaders, the individuals, really finding those opportunities to continue to listen to immigrants and refugees. And eventually there will be some common themes. And if there are resources like financially, really bringing that into the folks in those communities so they can utilize that. As we know, immigrants, once they sort of understand their community, they're entrepreneurs. If you look at New Economic, they did a report, 2012 to 2017. There was so much money that came from the immigrants and refugee community. So if we look at it holistically, immigrants and refugees really help our system. But if we don't find ways to really strengthen and support them, we will have immigrants and refugees who are leaving our community. And that is not going to be good for our communities because, they're consumers, they're also producers. So I think really continue to listen to as many folks as you can that are speaking and advocating for different opportunities and resources, such as the folks who are here. And I can say all the folks who are here, I'm always inspired because I feel like I'm getting a PhD in refugee immigrant education because they're so well informed and really they're advocating for the things that I would say I would also echo and advocate for too. But again, always making sure that if it is financially, that we are making sure that those finances are going to the communities that need it. So that way those things can be addressed.
Yeah, losing, refugees is, the Cedar Rapids economic development community is out there pitching for refugees to come to Cedar Rapids because we have such an acute, actually chronic workforce shortage, and they think welcoming newcomers is one way to address that. Stephanie, you were mentioning the 1970s, and that was a period where we welcomed a number of refugees from Southeast Asia during the conflicts in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. What do you think has changed since then? Is it the deteriorating politics surrounding immigration that we've seen over the last several years, that they're sort of, instead of welcoming them, they're kind of used as pawns in a political battle to score points and stoke fear? Do you think that's been a factor?
I think that's been one of many factors. I think there's been a lot of different events and different environments that have taken place since the mid-70s that has had an effect on refugee resettlement. But, combined together, we have a lot of politicians that would like to see refugee resettlement stop altogether, and for it to go away, and for funding to go back into, programs that support native-born Iowans and native-born Americans. But, I think Mugisha referred to the New American Economy report that highlighted the economic incentives. Obviously, I think that, regardless of all of the different factors that have led to where we are today, I think that historically Iowa's been a leader and has really had an internationally renowned reputation in refugee resettlement. And it's because our state politicians, anyway, historically, I know, former Governor Robert Ray left a large legacy, but each of the elected officials since, typically have supported across the aisle the continuation of refugee resettlement. There's a countless amount of reasons why refugees and immigrants make Iowa better. We've talked about, the billions they put into the state economy, how they've revitalized entire rural communities and saved schools from losing, from having to shut down like entirely in some of our rural communities across the state. They make our cultural tapestry just so much stronger, and then of course, just being able to offer some refuge to people when they're at their most vulnerable. There's a million reasons why it's important, why it's the right thing to do, why it makes our community better, why it makes our families better. My family personally benefited from, my kids exist because my husband was allowed to come here. So we, there's a lot of reasons why it make it better. And I think that, our state, while there may be some pushback to it nationally, our state typically has been pretty supportive. But it would be great to see it go back, or at least increase funding to gaining some of the funding that was lost over the years, to making it, a much more reasonable and rational amount of time and support system that people truly need in order for them to adapt and reacculturate. I mean, it's better for them. It's better for everybody. It's better for, our economy if we have to go down that path of reasons why it's the right thing to do. But there's a lot of reasons why the funding and the support for it should definitely increase.
Robin, don't have a ton of time, but I'd like to touch on immigration reform, which is something that, given the politics, doesn't seem to happen. Do you have ideas for what parts of the system that you would like to see changed, or anyone can jump in on that too?
Oh, that is a big question in a short amount of time. I mean, I will say that I'm heartened, at least in by the actions of the U.S. Department of Labor to expand, to ensure that workers' rights are more fully expanded to protect immigrant and refugee community members from retaliation as when they speak up about wage payment violations and other violations of their rights. I mean, I guess I would just want to insert in some of these final minutes that, while we're talking about the things that immigrant and refugee communities need to learn, I also just want to shift it back to those of us who were born in this country and who live in these communities. We have a lot to learn, right? And one of the things that we're seeing is employers don't understand, either don't understand or at times violating the protections that do exist against discrimination on the basis of citizenship status. So, one thing that we're seeing regularly, hearing about regularly in Eastern and Central Iowa is that people who are work authorized are being rejected from workplaces because the employers are failing to properly apply the I-9 process in which people can show their work authorization, and they're demanding like a green card when there are many other forms that demonstrate work eligibility. And so, the protections that are in place, I think are not fully being implemented. And then beyond that, I mean, it's desperately needed that we pass a more comprehensive immigration reform to give people a path to citizenship and full protection of the law, because it's not the presence of people that undermines standards, it's the absence of protections and rights. And
I think we're out of time. The hour flew by very quickly. So I want to thank all of you very much for joining this panel and sharing your thoughts. I think it's been really informative, and I really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you.
Everybody.